The restaurant lights glowed soft and golden, the kind of place where every glass sparkled and every whispered conversation carried a touch of wealth. At a quiet corner table sat Simone, 32 years old, a brilliant pediatric doctor, her long hair falling gracefully over her shoulders. 7 months pregnant, she rested one hand on her belly, as if to comfort both herself and the little heartbeat inside her. She wore a flowing white designer dress, elegant and impossibly expensive, the kind of beauty that made people stare not just at her face, but at the quiet dignity she carried into every room. But dignity often threatens those who have none, and on this night, it would collide with bitterness. Ashley, just 25, moved between the tables with a tray in hand. Her eyes, sharp with envy, burned with something darker than exhaustion. She wore her frown like armor, her every step heavy with resentment, and as her gaze fell upon Simone radiant, composed, yet undeniably different, the poison inside her heart began to surface. No one could have predicted what would happen next. The clinking of silverware paused. The low hum of conversation faded. And in a single cruel moment, ice water crashed down, drenching Simone's glowing dress, soaking through to her skin, chilling both her body and her spirit. The restaurant froze in silence. Simone trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of humiliation pressing into her soul. Ashley leaned close, her voice dripping with venom. "Maybe you should stick to places where you actually belong." In that instant, Simone's world shifted. She was not just a doctor, not just a mother-to-be, not just a woman in a white dress. She was a target of hate, and yet, even as her dignity was stripped in front of strangers, something far more powerful began to rise inside her. And this was only the beginning. It was 8:47 on a Tuesday night when the illusion of calm in one of the city's most prestigious restaurants was shattered by a single act of hate disguised as clumsiness. At the corner table, where the lighting fell softly across polished marble, sat Simone. She was 32, a Harvard-educated pediatric doctor, and 7 months pregnant. Her long black hair cascaded gracefully over her shoulders, and tonight she wore a white designer dress that seemed to glow under the chandelier, a symbol of both elegance and dignity. Her hand often rested gently on her belly, not only out of habit but as if she were shielding her unborn child from the weight of the world. To her, this was supposed to be a simple evening, a quiet dinner with her husband after a long day of saving lives at the hospital. But for others in the room, especially for one waitress who could not bear to see a black woman walk with such grace and confidence, her very presence was an offense. Ashley was only 25, working double shifts that barely paid her rent, her blonde hair pulled back carelessly, her face marked by permanent frustration. Her eyes carried the sharp bitterness of someone who had convinced herself that the world was unfair, that every success she didn't have must have been stolen by someone else. And when she saw Simone beautiful, glowing, dressed in luxury, something twisted inside her. To Ashley, Simone's elegance wasn't real. It was a performance, a lie, a black woman pretending to belong in a space Ashley believed should remain untouched by people like her. That was the poison of racism. It didn't need facts, it didn't need reason. It thrived on perception, on prejudice, on the stubborn belief that dignity and success were reserved for one skin color alone. Simone sat quietly, checking her phone, smiling faintly as she felt her baby kick. The moment was peaceful, almost tender, until Ashley appeared. Without a word, without even the courtesy of a warning, she lifted a pitcher of ice water and let it pour. The freezing liquid cascaded down Simone's white dress, soaking her skin, dripping onto the marble floor. Gasps erupted around the room, and then silence. Utter silence. Forks froze halfway to mouths. Conversations died in the air. In that instant, everyone became a witness, but no one became an ally. Ashley leaned closer, her lips curling into a cruel smirk, and whispered, "Oops, my bad. Maybe you should stick to places where you actually belong instead of pretending to be something you're not." It wasn't just the water that chilled Simone to her core. It was the venom in those words, the centuries of exclusion and humiliation they carried, condensed into a single sentence designed to wound. Simone's breath caught. Her chest tightened. She was a doctor who saved lives daily, a woman who had climbed her way from humble beginnings to unimaginable success. But in that moment, to Ashley, she was nothing more than a black woman who didn't belong. The humiliation stung deeper than the cold. Her heart raced as her hand instinctively covered her stomach, protecting her child from the stress she could feel tightening her entire body. Every second stretched long and unbearable. She looked around the restaurant. Eyes were on her, some wide with shock, others lowered with guilt. A few held pity, but none carried courage. Not one person stood up to say, "That's wrong." This is what racism often looks like. Not just in the cruelty of the offender, but in the silence of the bystanders who choose comfort over justice. Simone trembled, but not with fear, with the effort it took to contain her fury. She would not give Ashley the satisfaction of a breakdown. Slowly, with grace that seemed impossible under the weight of humiliation, she rose to her feet. Her white dress clung wetly to her skin, ruined, but her spine was unbroken. Her eyes met Ashley's, steady and unyielding, and in a voice barely above a whisper, yet carrying through the still air, she said, "You have no idea what you just did." The words cut deeper than a shout ever could. They hung in the air, thick with meaning, warning of consequences unseen. Simone then reached into her purse with shaking hands, pulled out exact change for her untouched meal, and, astonishingly, placed a crisp $500 bill on the table as a tip. The gesture silenced even the faint smirk on Ashley's lips. It wasn't generosity, it was defiance, a reminder that her dignity could not be stolen. With her head held high, though her eyes brimmed with tears she refused to shed, Simone walked toward the door. The diners shifted in their seats as she passed. Some looked away, ashamed of their cowardice. Others whispered apologies with their eyes, but no words escaped their lips. Injustice, Simone knew, was not only in the hands of those who act, but also in the silence of those who stand by. Ashley turned to her coworkers, masking her unease with arrogance. "Finally got rid of her," she whispered, but her hands shook as she picked up a rag to clean the mess she had made, and for the first time that night, she couldn't quite meet her coworkers' eyes. Somewhere, deep down, a voice reminded her that something was terribly wrong, but she smothered it with pride. Outside, the night air was cool, brushing against Simone's damp skin. A sleek black SUV waited at the curb, and when its door opened, Gerald stepped out. Tall, broad-shouldered, with an aura that commanded silence, Gerald was more than a husband, he was a man with influence, a man whose calm could shift into fury like a storm. The moment his eyes landed on Simone, her ruined dress, her trembling hands, her silent tears, his jaw tightened, his expression transformed into something dangerous. He took her hand tenderly, guided her into the car, and with a voice deadly calm, he asked, "What happened?" Simone looked back at the restaurant, her voice cracking under the weight of humiliation and fury, and said only 4 words, "Someone needs to learn respect." And with those words, the evening transformed from a cruel prank into the spark of something far larger. Racism had reached into their lives, not with a slur shouted in the street or a blatant denial of rights, but with water poured across a dress and words dripping with hate. Yet it had done more than humiliate Simone. It had awakened something inside her, and it had lit a fire in Gerald, a fire that would not burn quietly. This was no longer just about a waitress and a customer. It was about dignity denied, about a community's silence, about centuries of prejudice condensed into one terrible moment. And as the SUV pulled away into the night, carrying Simone and Gerald into the unknown, the world outside that restaurant had no idea that one act of hate had just set into motion a storm that would demand accountability, test the limits of mercy, and reveal the true cost of racism. What began as a spill of water was about to spill into every corner of Ashley's life. And for everyone watching, for everyone listening, this was only the beginning. The hum of the car engine was the only sound as the SUV pulled away from Charlie's dinner, but inside, the silence was heavy, filled with the weight of humiliation that clung to Simone's skin as stubbornly as the water that still dripped from her dress. She held her stomach with both hands, her breaths shallow and uneven. Gerald's hand was on the wheel, knuckles white, his jaw locked. He didn't speak, he didn't need to. His silence was more dangerous than any threat, a storm gathering just beyond the horizon. But then Simone gasped, not from tears, not from anger, but from pain. A sharp contraction gripped her body, sudden and overwhelming. "Gerald," her voice cracked, a mix of fear and desperation. "The baby." In an instant, Gerald's rage transformed into raw panic. He swerved the SUV toward the nearest hospital, his heart pounding with terror. The woman he loved, the child he longed for, both suddenly caught in a battle against something invisible, yet triggered by the cruelty of a stranger's hate. By the time they arrived at the emergency entrance, Simone's contractions had intensified. Nurses rushed her into a sterile white room, machines beeping rapidly as monitors tracked the fragile rhythm of a tiny heartbeat fighting to stay steady inside her. Premature contractions, the doctor explained quickly, his voice professional but edged with concern. We'll do everything we can to stop them, but stress like this is dangerous. She needs calm, no triggers, no emotional spikes. Otherwise, both mother and child are at risk. Gerald stood frozen at the foot of the bed, watching Simone's face contort in pain as tears slid down her cheeks. And in that moment, his fury was no longer abstract. It had a target. A waitress with bitter eyes, a smirk on her lips, and venom in her words. Someone had dared to pour not just water, but humiliation onto his wife's dignity. And now his unborn child's life hung in the balance because of it. Meanwhile, across town, Ashley was celebrating in the only way she knew how, by bragging. Back at the restaurant's break room, she leaned against the counter, sipping from a paper cup as if she had just won a battle. "You should have seen her face," she sneered to her coworkers. All that money, that fancy dress, and still just what she is. Doesn't matter what they wear. Doesn't change what's underneath. Some of her coworkers chuckled nervously. Others looked away, but none confronted her. Silence had protected Ashley once again. She mistook their discomfort for agreement, feeding her pride. She even took to social media, typing furiously on her phone. Had to teach some fake rich people a lesson tonight. Some folks need to know their place. The post quickly gained likes and laughing emojis from her circle of friends who shared her bitterness. Each reaction emboldened her, building a false sense of victory. She didn't know that across the city, Gerald was already setting things in motion that would make her laughter vanish. At the hospital, Simone lay still, her breathing shallow, as medication eased the contractions. Gerald sat beside her, holding her hand. She turned her head, eyes swollen from crying, and whispered, "Why does it never end, Gerald? I've worked so hard. I've saved lives." But to her I was nothing. Just nothing. Gerald's eyes burned. "You are not nothing," he said firmly. "You are everything. And she will learn that. I promise you." Those words were not empty. Gerald was a man with connections, construction companies, security firms, real estate holdings that stretched across the city. His influence ran deep, woven into the fabric of businesses and institutions that people like Ashley never imagined touched their lives. But tonight, that influence was no longer just about profit. It was about justice. And justice, to Gerald, was no longer negotiable. The next morning, Gerald's associates began their quiet inquiries. Who was Ashley Morrison? Where did she live? What debts did she carry? What weaknesses did she hide? The answers came quickly. A cramped apartment on the edge of town. A sick mother whose medication was expensive and barely covered by insurance. An 8-year-old son with a heart condition that required surgery she couldn't afford. And a trail of bitterness at her job, complaints from customers, whispers from coworkers, but no action taken by management. To most, these were just unfortunate details of a hard life. To Gerald, they were threads in a web he could pull until her entire world unraveled. Back at Charlie's dinner, the restaurant's management was already feeling the heat. Overnight, the video recorded by a college student had gone viral. Millions watched in outrage as Ashley poured water on a pregnant black woman and hissed words of disdain. The comments section overflowed with fury. "Fire her now. Boycott Charlie's dinner. How could no one step in?" Within hours, reservations began to cancel. High-profile clients called demanding answers. The restaurant's reputation, carefully built over years of catering to the wealthy, was crumbling because one employee had let her prejudice slip into the open. Yet Ashley, stubborn and blind, refused to take responsibility. She laughed off the video, claiming it was out of context, insisting Simone was showing off and deserved to be humbled. Her pride deafened her to the storm gathering around her. She didn't see that the very ground beneath her feet was already shifting. Back at the hospital, Simone rested, but her mind refused to settle. She replayed the moment over and over, the water, the words, the silence of the diners. Each time, her heart ached more, not just for herself, but for her child. What kind of world was she bringing this baby into? Would her daughter, years from now, face the same humiliation simply because of her skin? The thought was unbearable. She whispered to Gerald, her voice fragile but resolute. "Promise me this, our child will not grow up in a world where silence wins." Gerald squeezed her hand. "I promise," he said, and in that promise lay a dangerous determination. Racism is not always a gunshot or a slur shouted in the street. Sometimes it is water poured across a dress, words whispered with venom, silence maintained by those too afraid to stand up. But the consequences ripple outward, through bodies, through hearts, through unborn children who feel the stress of their mother's tears. That was the reality Simone now lived, and Gerald would not allow it to stand. As the doctors monitored Simone and prepared for the possibility of premature labor, Gerald made a decision. This was no longer just about his wife's dignity. This was about protecting his family, about sending a message that hate, no matter how small it pretends to be, has consequences. Ashley Morrison thought she had humiliated a powerless woman. What she didn't know was that she had just declared war on a family whose strength ran deeper than she could possibly imagine. By the time Simone finally drifted into restless sleep, Gerald had already made the first calls. Quietly, carefully, with the precision of a man who understood both business and power. He would not raise his voice. He would not make threats. He would let the system, his system, show Ashley what it means to strip someone of dignity. And as the night deepened, one thing became clear. Ashley's laughter would not last long. Because in the end, hate always thinks it has won until justice walks through the door. The morning after the incident, the city was already buzzing. The video of Simone's humiliation, captured on a shaky phone by a law student sitting 2 tables away, had exploded across social media. By sunrise, it was on Twitter, TikTok, Instagram Reels, and even the local morning news. Millions of strangers who had never heard Simone's name watched in horror as a pregnant black woman in a glowing white dress was drenched in ice water while a waitress sneered that she didn't belong. The images struck like a blade, the dripping fabric clinging to Simone's body, the silent restaurant frozen in complicity, the smirk on Ashley's face. Outrage grew with each passing hour. Hashtags rose quickly. Justice for Simone. Pregnant and humiliated. Silence violence. Inside the hospital, Simone scrolled through her phone with trembling hands, watching strangers defend her when not one person in that room had dared to. She whispered softly to Gerald, "Why do people find their voices online but not in real life?" Gerald didn't answer. He only watched her face, etched with both pain and determination, and thought of the promise he had made the night before. Meanwhile, Ashley walked into Charlie's dinner that morning as though nothing had happened. She wore the same scowl, the same arrogance, dismissing her manager's questions with rolled eyes. "It's all blown out of proportion," she insisted. "That woman was showing off. I just put her in her place." She didn't realize her own words echoed the very prejudice millions were condemning online. To Ashley, the online storm was noise, something distant, unreal. She thought she was untouchable. She thought the world would move on. But Gerald was already moving quietly behind the scene. He started with the cameras. Charlie's dinner, like most high-end establishments, had surveillance footage. Gerald's men knew exactly who to contact. Within hours, a copy of the unedited tape, time-stamped, crystal clear, was delivered to Gerald's office. The footage showed not only Ashley's deliberate action, but also the reactions of her co-workers, the nervous laughter, the awkward glances, the complicit silence of the manager who watched from the corner and chose to do nothing. It wasn't just Ashley's crime. It was an institutional failure, a culture that allowed hate to fester under chandeliers and fine dining. Next came the witnesses. The law student who had uploaded the video agreed to speak with Gerald's lawyer. A busboy who had seen Ashley mock other black patrons finally found the courage to confess, describing a pattern of behavior that had been ignored for months. Piece by piece, the evidence formed a picture bigger than one night. This wasn't a mistake. It was a history. Back at the hospital, Simone listened as Gerald laid out what they had gathered. "It's not just her," he said softly. "It's the system that protected her, the manager who looked away, the co-workers who stayed silent. Every single one of them played a role." Simone's heart tightened. She wanted justice, but she also wanted peace for herself, for her baby. Yet every time she closed her eyes, she saw Ashley smirk, heard the words dripping with venom, felt the cold water like a wound across her skin. Her unborn child shifted restlessly inside her, as if echoing the turmoil in her heart. Meanwhile, Charlie's dinner was unraveling. High-profile clients canceled reservations in droves. The press camped outside the sleek glass doors demanding statements. Reporters wanted answers. Why had Ashley not been fired immediately? Why had management ignored past complaints? The owner, desperate, called Ashley into his office. "Do you understand what you've done? We're losing hundreds of thousands of dollars in business." Ashley folded her arms, defiant. "This is ridiculous. People are overreacting. I didn't do anything that bad." But even as she spoke, her phone buzzed with notifications, angry comments, threats, demands for accountability. She scrolled, her face paling. The video had reached her extended family, her neighbors, even her son's school. She slammed the phone down, but the weight of the backlash pressed heavily against her. Still, she clung to her pride, convinced the storm would blow over. Gerald, however, knew storms like this didn't blow over, they spread, and he intended to guide it. He instructed his lawyers to prepare a civil suit. Racial harassment, emotional distress, reckless endangerment of a pregnant woman and her unborn child. The damages would be astronomical, the headlines devastating. But more than the legal battle, Gerald wanted something deeper. He wanted the truth to become undeniable. The midpoint twist came when Gerald's investigator returned with an unexpected discovery. One of Ashley's co-workers, a nervous young hostess, confessed that Ashley had bragged days earlier about teaching a lesson to wealthy black customers. She had even laughed about how management always covered for her, how she could cry on cue and play the victim if complaints arose. This was no accident. It was a pattern, premeditated and protected. When Gerald shared this with Simone, she felt her chest tighten. "So it wasn't just me," she whispered. "It was anyone who looked like me." She stared out the hospital window, watching raindrops streak the glass. How many others stayed silent? How many walked out feeling worthless while she laughed? Gerald took her hand gently. "Not anymore," he said. This time, the silence ends. The conflict escalated further when local news stations aired interviews with past patrons who came forward. A black couple described how Ashley had joked that they looked lost and probably couldn't afford the menu. Another woman recalled Ashley's sarcastic tone when she asked about wine pairings, as though sophistication was impossible for her skin color. Each testimony piled on, painting Ashley not as a one-time offender but as a repeat perpetrator of casual cruelty. Ashley's world began to crumble. Her manager, desperate to save the restaurant, suspended her indefinitely. But by then, the damage was done. Protesters stood outside Charlie's dinner holding signs, "Respect Black mothers. Silence is complicity. Justice for Simone." The restaurant's reputation, once gleaming, now rotted under the weight of public condemnation. And still, Ashley refused to accept responsibility. "It's all lies," she muttered to herself as she scrolled through endless hate messages. But deep down, a seed of fear had been planted. Because, for the first time, she realized the consequences weren't just online. They were real, tangible, pressing in on her from all sides. At the hospital, Simone's contractions had finally eased, but the emotional wounds ran deeper. She listened to the news reports, the testimonies, the growing protests, and for the first time since that night, she felt something shift inside her. Not peace, not forgiveness, but power. Her humiliation had sparked a movement, one that might finally expose the quiet cruelty so many endured in silence. As Gerald tucked a blanket around her shoulders, he whispered, "This isn't just our fight anymore, it's bigger than us now." And he was right. Because what began as a single cruel act in the golden glow of a restaurant was now a reckoning spreading across the city. Ashley thought she had put Simone in her place. Instead, she had placed herself at the center of a storm that would strip away her pride, her power, and the illusion that racism could hide forever behind silence. And as the storm gathered, Gerald's quiet determination hardened into something even sharper. This wasn't just retaliation. It was the beginning of a lesson, one that Ashley Morrison, and everyone like her, would never forget. The hospital room was quiet except for the steady beeping of monitors tracking the fragile rhythm of Simone's unborn child. The contractions had slowed, but every time Simone closed her eyes, she saw it all again, the freezing cascade of water, the laughter, the silence of those who chose to look away. The humiliation clung to her like a second skin. Gerald sat beside her, his hand wrapped firmly around hers, his eyes distant. He was no longer just a husband watching his wife recover. He was a man calculating, weighing, deciding between two roads that stretched before him, the slow grind of the law or the swift strike of power. "Gerald," Simone whispered, her voice raw from exhaustion, "don't do anything that will make it worse. I just want peace. For me. For the baby." Gerald turned to her, his expression softening for only a moment. "Peace doesn't come from silence, Simone. Not this time. She poured water on you, on our child. That wasn't just humiliation. That was endangerment." He paused, his jaw tightening. "If the law won't make her understand, then I will." The next morning, Gerald convened his inner circle in his downtown office, a sleek glass tower that overlooked the city, a symbol of the empire he had built from the ground up. Around the polished oak table sat his lawyers, his business advisors, and two men who didn't appear on any payroll but whose loyalty to Gerald was unquestionable. The lawyer, a silver-haired man named Collins, spoke first. "We have enough to sue. Racial harassment, emotional distress, reckless endangerment of a pregnant woman. The video alone is damning. A civil suit would bankrupt her personally and cripple the restaurant." But Gerald only leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing. "The law moves slow. It gives people time to spin their stories, to play the victim. I don't want her hiding behind excuses. I want her to feel it, every day, until she understands what she did." His advisor, a sharp-eyed woman named Renee, interjected. "There's another way. You already own the building Charlie's Dinner leases. We can raise their rent, restructure their terms." As for Ashley, her apartment building just came under review for sale. One of your shell companies could acquire it, quietly. Her life is already fragile. We don't need to touch her directly. We just need to tighten the walls around her." Gerald said nothing, but the cold calculation in his gaze was enough. The decision was made. While Gerald moved like a chess master setting pieces into place, Ashley was beginning to feel the first tremors of her world shifting. At Charlie's Dinner, her suspension became official. Customers had abandoned the restaurant in waves. Protesters gathered outside nightly with signs, "Respect Black mothers. Silence is violence." The owner, red-faced and desperate, called Ashley into his office. "This has cost us $200,000 in cancellations," he snapped. "Do you understand that? Do you understand what you've done?" Ashley folded her arms, her face twisted with defiance. "This is ridiculous. People are overreacting. That woman was showing off. I just put her in her place. You're really going to throw me under the bus for that?" The owner slammed his fist on the desk. "You don't get it, do you? You're not the victim here. You humiliated a pregnant woman, a doctor, and now we're paying the price. Effective immediately, you're fired." For the first time, Ashley's confidence cracked. She left the office shaking, her pride colliding with fear. But when she got home, it was worse. A letter taped to her door informed her that her rent was increasing by $400 next month due to market adjustments. She stared at the paper in disbelief. She was already drowning in bills. This new demand would pull her under completely. At first, she thought it was coincidence. Bad luck piling on top of bad luck. But then her car insurance notice arrived. Her premiums had been raised by 60% after a routine review. Days later, her mother's pharmacy called to inform her that her insurance no longer covered her life-saving medication. The new out-of-pocket cost, $4,000 a month. Ashley collapsed onto her couch, clutching her head, the walls of her life closing in. What she didn't know was that each of those walls bore Gerald's fingerprints. His real estate company had quietly acquired her building, legally implementing rent increases. His connections in insurance had fabricated paperwork that flagged her as high risk. The pharmacy that supplied her mother's medication was located in a property Gerald indirectly controlled. Each thread of Ashley's life was being pulled, tightened, constricted, until she could barely breathe. Meanwhile, Simone watched all of this unfold with a mix of unease and grim satisfaction. Part of her wanted to stop Gerald, to tell him enough was enough. But another part, the part still aching from humiliation, still reliving the contraction pain, still hearing Ashley's voice dripping with venom, felt a dark satisfaction. "Maybe she deserves it," Simone murmured one night, staring at the hospital ceiling. "Maybe now she'll understand what it feels like to be powerless." Gerald sat at her side, his voice low. "That's the point. She tried to strip you of your dignity. Now she'll see what it means to lose everything. But in the quiet hours of the night, Simone's heart wrestled with itself. She was a doctor, a healer. She had sworn to protect life, not destroy it. And yet, here she was, watching her husband dismantle another woman's world piece by piece. Ashley had been cruel, hateful, destructive, but Simone could not shake the image of her as a single mother, her son, her sick mother. Did justice mean destruction, or was there another road? The conflict between law and power, between justice and revenge, was no longer theoretical. It was inside Simone's own chest, pulsing with every beat of her fragile heart and her unborn child's. Ashley, meanwhile, was unraveling. She sat at her kitchen table late into the night, bills spread out before her, her phone buzzing with angry messages and death threats. She thought of her son, Tyler, only 8 years old, who needed heart surgery she couldn't afford. She thought of her mother, coughing in the next room, her medication running out. And for the first time, Ashley wept not tears of bitterness, but of fear. The walls were closing in, and still, she didn't understand that every brick pressing against her life was being moved by Gerald's hand. At the hospital, Simone whispered to Gerald one last plea. "Don't let this consume you. Don't let it consume me. I don't want our baby born into hate." Gerald kissed her hand gently, but his eyes remained cold. "Our child will be born into respect," he said, "and respect sometimes comes only when people learn the cost of their hate." 2 roads stretched before them: the path of law, with its slow promises of justice, or the path of power, with its swift but merciless consequences. And as Gerald's web tightened around Ashley's fragile life, Simone realized that the choice was no longer his alone. It was hers, too. Because in the end, the question wasn't just how to punish hate. The question was how far they were willing to go before they became something they no longer recognized. And as the night deepened, the answer to that question drew closer, step by step, heartbeat by fragile heartbeat. The pressure had been building for weeks. Ashley Morrison, once smug in her cruelty, now sat alone in her dimly lit apartment, surrounded by unpaid bills and eviction notices. Her phone buzzed endlessly with hate messages, angry comments, even threats. Each sound made her flinch, but the silence between them was worse. That silence reminded her of the truth that she was utterly alone. The restaurant had cut her loose. Her co-workers avoided her calls, and even her closest friends had begun to distance themselves. No one wanted to be associated with the face of viral racism, but Ashley still told herself she could handle it. She had always survived on grit and stubbornness. She convinced herself she would find a way, that this storm too would pass. That is, until the day the call came from Washington Elementary. It was a Friday afternoon when her phone rang. The voice on the other end trembled with urgency. "Mrs. Morrison, this is the school nurse. It's your son, Tyler. He collapsed during recess. He's conscious, but he's struggling to breathe. We've called an ambulance. You need to meet us at St. Mary's Hospital immediately." The phone nearly slipped from her hand. Her heart pounded as her legs gave out beneath her. Tyler, her sweet, fragile 8-year-old boy, was her only light in this dark world. She raced out the door, her mind a blur, tears streaming down her face. When she arrived at the hospital, she found Tyler pale and weak on a gurney, surrounded by doctors and machines. His small chest rose and fell with shallow breaths. Wires attached to his body, monitors beeping ominously. Dr. Matthews, the attending pediatric surgeon, pulled Ashley aside. His expression was grave. "Your son has a congenital heart defect. We've been monitoring it, but now it's become critical. He needs surgery within 48 hours or—" His voice trailed off, but Ashley understood the silence. Without the operation, her son might not survive. Ashley clutched her chest, shaking her head. "How much? What does it cost?" Dr. Matthews glanced at the chart, then looked her in the eyes. $68,000. Insurance covers a portion, but you'll need at least $34,000 up front. Without that guarantee, we can't move forward. The words crushed her like a physical blow. $34,000? She didn't even have $300 to her name. Her rent was overdue, her mother's medication was already beyond reach, and now this? Her vision blurred as she sank into a chair, sobbing uncontrollably. She called everyone she could think of, friends, co-workers, even family members who had long since cut ties. Each call ended the same way: rejection, excuses, silence. She begged the hospital finance office, pleaded with the insurance company, but every door slammed shut. By midnight, Ashley sat at Tyler's bedside, clutching his small hand in hers. His face was pale, his breathing labored, his innocent body hooked up to machines keeping him alive. She wept silently, stroking his hair, whispering promises she didn't know how to keep. "Mommy's here, baby. Mommy's going to fix this. I swear." But inside, she was breaking. And then Dr. Matthews returned, offering a lifeline she never expected. "There might be one option," he said carefully. "There's a businessman in this city, Gerald Cruz. He runs the Cruz Foundation. They sometimes cover medical cases like this, especially for children. I can't promise anything, but if you can get to him, plead your case." Ashley's heart stopped. The name hit her like lightning. Gerald Cruz, the man who had carried his pregnant wife out of Charlie's dinner 3 weeks earlier. The man whose glare had frozen her in fear. The man whose wife she had drenched in water while sneering that she didn't belong. "No," Ashley whispered, shaking her head violently. "Anyone but him." But when she looked at Tyler, his small chest rising and falling with fragile breaths, her pride shattered. There was no choice. For her son, she would crawl. She would beg. She would face the man whose wife she had humiliated. The next morning, Ashley dressed in the only clean clothes she had left, faded jeans and a wrinkled blouse, and clutched Tyler's medical file to her chest. Her hands trembled as she walked into the gleaming glass tower of Cruz Construction and Development. The marble lobby shone with wealth and power, intimidating in its perfection. She told the receptionist her story in a trembling voice. To her shock, the receptionist nodded and said, "Mr. Cruz will see you now." She was led into a vast office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. The man standing at the window turned slowly, and Ashley's blood ran cold. Gerald. His presence filled the room, his expression calm but dangerous, like a predator studying its prey. "So," he said quietly, gesturing for her to sit, "you're Ashley Morrison, the woman who poured water on my pregnant wife and told her she didn't belong." Ashley's throat closed. Her knees nearly buckled. She collapsed into the chair, clutching the file with white knuckles. "Please, my son. He's dying. He needs surgery. I know what I did was unforgivable, but please, don't punish him for my mistakes." Gerald studied her for a long moment, his eyes unreadable. "Your son's life is in my hands," he said finally. "Do you see the irony in that, Mrs. Morrison? You tried to humiliate my family, and now you come here begging us to save yours." Ashley broke down completely, sobbing so violently she could barely speak. "I'll do anything. I'll apologize publicly. I'll work for you for free. I'll spend the rest of my life making up for what I did. Just, please, don't let my little boy die because of me." The door opened, and Simone entered the room. She had recovered enough from her scare, though her steps were still careful, one hand resting on her pregnant belly. She stopped when she saw Ashley, the same woman who had drenched her in ice water, now broken and pleading, tears streaming down her face. Simone's heart twisted. She remembered the pain, the humiliation, the way Ashley's words had cut into her soul, but she also saw the raw desperation in her eyes, the terror of a mother on the edge of losing her child. She turned to Gerald, her voice steady but soft. "Gerald, let's hear her out." Ashley turned to Simone, collapsing further into her chair. "I'm so sorry," she sobbed. "I was bitter, angry, drowning in my own problems. I thought you were pretending to be rich, pretending to belong. I wanted to hurt you because I was hurting. And now my son, my baby, he's paying the price." The room was silent, heavy with tension. Gerald's jaw tightened, his eyes burning with the memory of Simone's tears. But Simone's gaze softened as she looked at Ashley. For the first time, she saw not just the woman who had humiliated her, but the broken mother clinging to hope. Finally, Gerald spoke, his voice low and deliberate. "Your son's surgery will be paid for, but understand this, the money is not free. You will stand before the world and admit what you did. You will tell the truth, not excuses, not half measures. And then, perhaps, you will begin to understand what respect really means." Ashley collapsed in sobs, nodding furiously, clutching the file to her chest like a lifeline. For the first time in weeks, she felt a flicker of hope. As she left the office, Simone sank into a chair, her hand on her belly. She whispered to Gerald, "We're not saving her. We're saving her son." That child is innocent. Gerald nodded, but his eyes remained cold. Justice, he said softly, this is how it begins. And as Ashley walked back into the city, clutching the promise of her son's salvation, she had no idea that her road to redemption was only just beginning. The hours after Gerald's decision moved like years for Ashley. The moment she walked out of Crew's construction, clutching the promise of help, she felt the crushing weight of her humiliation settle onto her shoulders. Pride, arrogance, denial, those defenses she had clung to for weeks, were gone. All that remained was desperation, a mother who had begged the very family she once ridiculed to save her child. And though she had gotten what she came for, the price Gerald demanded weighed heavier than money ever could. She would have to bare herself before the world, strip away every excuse, and admit her crime. At St. Mary's Hospital, the corridors were filled with fluorescent light and the faint smell of antiseptic. Ashley sat in the waiting room, her hands trembling as she signed the consent forms for Tyler's surgery. $34,000 paid in full by the Cruz Foundation. The nurses whispered about it, eyes wide with surprise. Did you hear? Gerald Cruz's foundation is covering the entire cost. News spread fast in hospitals, and soon staff members began to connect the dots. The viral video, the pregnant woman, the disgraced waitress. Ashley kept her head down, shame burning her cheeks. She wanted to disappear. The surgery took 8 agonizing hours. Ashley sat in a chair, staring at the floor tiles as if they held the answer to her future. Every time the operating room doors swung open, her heart leapt, only to sink again when it wasn't the surgeon. She whispered prayers she hadn't spoken since childhood, promises she wasn't sure she could keep. Please, God, let him live. I'll change. I'll do whatever it takes. Just don't take him from me. Finally, Dr. Matthews emerged, his face lined with exhaustion but softened with relief. He made it. The surgery was successful. Tyler's stable. He's going to need recovery time, but he's going to live. Ashley collapsed into tears, sobbing so hard she could barely breathe. The nurses watched quietly, some with pity, some with judgment. They knew who she was. They had seen the video. But in that moment, she was just a mother saved from losing her child. 3 days later, Simone walked into Tyler's recovery room. She wore a simple navy dress, her pregnant belly prominent, her presence both commanding and gentle. Ashley jumped to her feet, eyes wide, guilt flooding her all over again. She stammered, "Dr. Cruz, But Simone raised a hand. "This isn't about me. I came to see him." She walked to Tyler's bedside, her hand resting lightly on the rail. The boy stirred, his small eyes fluttering open, unaware of the storm his life had become. Simone's expression softened. "He's beautiful, innocent. He deserves better." Ashley's voice cracked. "I almost cost you your baby, and now you've saved mine. How do I live with that?" Simone looked at her for a long moment, her eyes filled with a mix of pain and compassion. "By facing it, by telling the truth, not to me, to everyone." That was the beginning of Ashley's public reckoning. Gerald made it clear. The financial help came with conditions. She would stand before the cameras, not with a lawyer's statement, not with carefully crafted words, but with her own voice. Raw, honest, no excuses. The press conference was set outside Charlie's Dinner, the place where it had all begun. The restaurant's once golden facade was now stained with graffiti. Racist service equals closed doors. Protesters still gathered nightly, their chants echoing through the streets. When word spread that Ashley Morrison would speak, the crowd doubled. Reporters set up tripods, microphones buzzed, the air thick with anticipation. Ashley stood on the steps, pale and trembling, a microphone in front of her. She clutched a sheet of paper but quickly crumpled it in her fist. She couldn't hide behind prepared lines. Her voice shook as she began. 3 weeks ago, I poured ice water on a pregnant black woman. I told her she didn't belong here. I humiliated her in front of strangers. And I did it because I was angry, bitter, and hateful. There's no excuse. I wanted to hurt her. I wanted her to feel small because I felt small inside. The crowd was silent, cameras clicking furiously. Ashley's tears streamed down her face. That woman is Dr. Simone Cruz, a pediatric surgeon who saves children's lives. And when I attacked her, she was carrying a child of her own. I could have harmed her baby. I could have caused something irreversible. And instead of letting me drown in the consequences, she and her husband saved my son's life. Her voice cracked completely. The woman I tried to destroy gave me mercy I didn't deserve. The crowd erupted not in applause, but in a storm of reactions. Some shouted, "Too late!" Others yelled for justice, for accountability beyond words. A few wept quietly, moved by the rawness of her confession. Social media lit up instantly, clips of Ashley crying, headlines flashing, "Racist waitress breaks down, admits guilt." The nation was watching, but the backlash was brutal. Comments flooded in. "She's only sorry because she got caught. Too little, too late. Save your tears, her racism almost killed a mother and her child." Others, however, called it a powerful moment of accountability, a lesson in facing consequences. The debate raged. Was it redemption or performance? Back at the hospital, Simone watched the live stream from her room. Her hand rested on her belly, her baby shifting inside her. She whispered softly, "Maybe now she'll understand." Yet even as she said it, doubt flickered in her chest. Was Ashley's pain enough to heal the wound she had caused? Was this the beginning of change or just a spectacle? Gerald, on the other hand, felt no doubt. He stood at the back of the press conference, unseen, watching Ashley break down before the cameras. His jaw was tight, his eyes cold. To him, this was justice. Not enough, perhaps, but a start. He leaned toward Renee, his advisor, and murmured, "She thought humiliation was power. Now she knows what it feels like." But inside Simone's heart, the conflict deepened. She was a healer, not a destroyer. And though Ashley's apology was raw, it didn't erase the contraction pains, the fear for her baby's life, the humiliation that would never fully fade. Mercy had saved Tyler, but justice still felt incomplete. That night, as Ashley sat alone in her apartment, the flood of reactions poured in. Her phone buzzed nonstop. News outlets requesting interviews, strangers sending messages of hate and pity alike. She curled up on the couch, exhausted, her face swollen from crying. Tyler slept peacefully in the next room, his heartbeat steady after surgery. Ashley whispered into the darkness, "I don't know if I'll ever be forgiven, but I'll spend the rest of my life trying." For the first time in weeks, she meant it. And for the first time, she realized that redemption wasn't a gift given once. It was a battle she would have to fight every single day. Simone, lying awake in her hospital bed, felt her unborn child kick strongly, almost defiantly, as if reminding her that life continued, no matter the pain. She closed her eyes and thought, forgiveness is not weakness, but neither is justice. Somewhere between the two, a path was forming. And that path would not only decide Ashley's fate, it would shape the future of everyone watching. The press conference was over, but the storm was only beginning. Ashley had stood on those steps outside Charlie's dinner, her face streaked with tears, her words raw with regret, yet the world was divided. To some, her apology was powerful, a glimpse of a broken woman trying to change. To others, it was nothing more than performance, crocodile tears squeezed out under pressure. The headlines were relentless. Racist waitress begs for forgiveness. Too little, too late. Redemption or rehearsal? Back in her apartment, Ashley sat hunched on her couch, scrolling through the endless flood of comments. Some messages offered support. "You can change. Keep going." Others were venomous. "Once a racist, always a racist." "We don't believe you." Each word pierced her differently. But none hurt as much as hearing Tyler stir in the next room, his weak voice calling, "Mom." He was alive because of the very people she had tried to destroy. That truth haunted her like a shadow that never left. But Gerald was not finished. He wanted Ashley to feel every consequence, not just from the world outside, but within her own soul. A week later, Ashley received a formal document delivered to her door. It wasn't a lawsuit, it was something stranger. An agreement, drafted by the Cruz Foundation, outlining the conditions of what Gerald called restorative justice. The terms were clear. Ashley would complete 200 hours of community service at a local center for mothers and children, many of them Black and Latina women struggling with poverty and discrimination. She would attend mandatory diversity training, not the perfunctory kind offered by corporations, but deep, immersive workshops led by survivors of racial trauma. She would write a 3,000-word reflection on her actions and present it publicly at the end of the program. And every month, she would report her progress directly to the Foundation's board, where Simone herself would sit across the table, measuring her sincerity. Ashley read the document with shaking hands. Part of her wanted to slam it down and scream that this was too much, that she wasn't a criminal, that she was being treated like some public enemy. But then she heard Tyler coughing in the next room, the sound of fragile life saved by mercy, not by her own strength. She signed the agreement with tears streaming down her face. Her first day at the community center was brutal. The director, a black woman named Mariah, greeted her with cool professionalism. "You're here because you need to be," she said flatly. "Not because you chose to be. Don't expect anyone here to pat you on the back. You'll earn trust with your actions, not your words." Ashley was assigned to clean floors, serve meals, and organize supplies. Every interaction felt like a mirror reflecting her shame. The mothers eyed her warily, some whispering, others ignoring her entirely. Children stared at her, curious but cautious, as if sensing the weight of what she had done. At lunch, Ashley found herself sitting beside Maria, a young black mother in her 20s, cradling a baby girl. The moment Ashley sat down, Maria's eyes hardened. "Why are you here?" she asked sharply. Ashley swallowed hard. "Because I hurt someone like you, and I need to learn how not to." Maria's lips curled. "You think sitting here makes up for it? My cousin was told she didn't belong in a store last month. My uncle's been pulled over 3 times this year for nothing. You think an apology changes any of that?" Ashley lowered her gaze, her voice trembling. "No. But maybe if I can change myself, maybe if I can show my son another way to live, then it won't happen again. Not from me, not from him." Maria studied her for a long moment, then turned back to her baby. She didn't forgive Ashley. Not yet. But she didn't push her away either. For Ashley, that sliver of tolerance was more mercy than she deserved. Meanwhile, Simone followed Ashley's progress closely. At the hospital, Simone's own pregnancy had become increasingly difficult. Stress had left its mark, more late-night contractions, more warnings from her doctor. Yet every time she watched the updates from the community center, she felt a strange pull. She saw Ashley mopping floors, serving meals, listening to stories of discrimination she had once dismissed. Simone wondered, was this punishment or was it healing? One night, Simone confided in Gerald. "When I look at her, I don't see the woman who poured water on me anymore. I see someone broken, trying to rebuild. Part of me feels relief. Another part worries I'm letting her off too easy." Gerald's jaw tightened. "She put you in the hospital, Simone. She put our baby at risk. Don't let her tears blind you." But Simone shook her head. "It's not about her tears. It's about what happens next. If she changes, if she truly learns, then maybe this isn't just about revenge. Maybe it's about creating something better." That conversation haunted Gerald. He had built his empire on control, on never allowing weakness. Yet as he watched his wife wrestle with compassion even after everything she had suffered, he began to wonder if justice meant more than destruction. Still, he couldn't forgive. Not yet. As weeks passed, Ashley's work at the center slowly began to shift her. She heard stories that pierced deeper than any online comment ever could. A black businessman described being followed by security in a department store. A Latina doctor recounted being mistaken for cleaning staff by her own patients. A young mother told how her child cried after classmates said they didn't belong at school. Each story was a blade cutting through Ashley's illusions, forcing her to confront the truth. She had been part of a system of cruelty far larger than herself. One afternoon, Maria, the mother who had confronted her, approached Ashley with her baby in her arms. "Hold her," Maria said suddenly. Ashley froze. "What?" "Hold her," Maria repeated firmly. With trembling hands, Ashley reached out and cradled the infant. The baby's eyes were wide, innocent, untainted by hate. Tears spilled down Ashley's face. "I almost destroyed someone like her," she whispered. Maria's voice softened, just slightly. "Then don't. Ever again." It was a moment small in the eyes of the world, but monumental in Ashley's heart. For the first time, she felt the weight of what she had almost taken from Simone. Not just dignity, not just pride, but the fragile, irreplaceable bond between mother and child. Back at the hospital, Simone went into early labor scares again. Doctors warned her that stress was still a threat, that she needed calm. She thought about Ashley, about the woman who had nearly broken her and who was now trying, piece by piece, to rebuild herself. Simone closed her eyes and whispered to her unborn child, "The world will try to tear you down, but maybe, just maybe, people can change. And as Ashley finished another day at the center, mopping floors with sweat dripping from her forehead, she realized something with painful clarity. Redemption wasn't a finish line she could cross in a speech or a single act. It was a road she would have to walk every day for the rest of her life. A road paved not by her words, but by her willingness to listen, to serve, to admit that she had been wrong. A road where every step would be measured not by how she was seen, but by how she chose to see others. And though she still faced backlash, though the world still doubted her, Ashley whispered to herself as she locked the mop away for the night, "I will not waste the mercy I was given." The first press conference had shaken the city, but it was only a spark compared to the firestorm that followed. Ashley Morrison's tear-streaked face was everywhere on news sites, late-night talk shows, endless loops of clips dissected and replayed. To some, she was a symbol of accountability, a white woman finally owning her cruelty. To others, she was a manipulator, crying only because she had been caught. The split was vicious. On Twitter, her name trended daily. One hashtag read number, Ashley apologized. Another read number, too late Ashley. Ashley thought the worst was over after the cameras turned off, but she was wrong. The Cruz Foundation made it clear. Her journey had only begun. The next step was mandatory diversity training sessions, unlike anything she had imagined. These were not corporate PowerPoints with bullet points and awkward icebreakers. These were raw, face-to-face testimonies from people who had lived through decades of discrimination, pain woven into every word. On the first day, Ashley sat in a folding chair in a crowded church basement, her notebook open, her palms sweating. Across from her sat an older black man named Henry, 70 years old, his voice gravelly yet steady. He spoke about being dragged out of a diner in the 1,960 seconds simply for ordering coffee in the wrong place. "They poured hot coffee down my back," he said, his eyes locked on Ashley. "And do you know what I remember most? Not the burns, not the pain, the silence. Every white face in that diner just kept eating, pretending nothing happened." Ashley's throat tightened. She saw herself reflected in his story, not the victim, but the silent bystander, the one who let cruelty stand, the one who inflicted it. Tears burned her eyes, but she forced herself to keep listening. The next speaker was a Latina doctor who described being mistaken for cleaning staff by her own patients. "They couldn't imagine someone who looked like me holding the power to heal them," she said. Her voice cracked. "Do you know how it feels to work twice as hard, save lives, and still be treated like you're invisible?" Ashley scribbled furiously in her notebook, the words trembling across the page. Invisible, twice as hard. Silence hurts more than pain. The most devastating session came when a young black mother named Charisse stood at the front of the room with her 6-year-old daughter clinging to her leg. She told the group about her child being called a slur on the playground. "She came home crying, asking me why her skin was wrong. Do you know what that does to a mother?" Charisse's voice broke, her tears streaming openly. "I'd take 1,000 insults myself if it meant she didn't have to carry that weight." Ashley sobbed openly, no longer able to contain it. She thought of Simone, 7 months pregnant, drenched in ice water while strangers stared. She thought of her own son, Tyler, and how her hatred had poisoned not only her victims, but the very child she claimed to love. She whispered to herself, "I taught him hate. I almost taught him hate." Meanwhile, Simone was nearing the final weeks of her pregnancy. The contractions had lessened, but the emotional toll remained heavy. She followed Ashley's progress closely through the reports sent to the foundation. Sometimes she watched clips of Ashley speaking at training sessions, trembling and tearful, admitting her wrongs. And though part of Simone felt a flicker of pride that maybe change was possible, another part of her recoiled. Was it fair that Ashley could cry her way into redemption while Simone's dignity could never be restored? Late one evening, Simone sat in the nursery she and Gerald had prepared, folding tiny onesies into neat stacks. Gerald walked in, his presence heavy, his eyes still burning with the storm of a man who had not yet forgiven. Simone spoke softly. "I see her trying, but every time I watch I feel both hope and anger. Hope that she might change, anger that she gets the chance at all." Gerald placed a hand on her shoulder. "Don't mistake effort for absolution. She may be learning, but that doesn't erase what she did to you, to us. Our child will be born into this world, and she almost made it harder before life even began." The conflict inside Simone deepened. She wanted justice, but she also wanted healing. She knew too well the cycle of hate. It destroyed not only the victim, but the perpetrator. Yet forgiveness felt like a bridge too far. She wondered if mercy and justice could ever coexist. Ashley's journey only grew harder. Part of the Foundation's program required her to face live audiences, town halls, schools, community forums where she would tell her story and answer unfiltered questions. The first time, she stood in a gymnasium filled with high school students. Many of them were Black and Latino, their arms crossed, their eyes skeptical. One girl raised her hand and asked bluntly, "Why should we believe you? You thought we didn't belong. Why do you belong here now?" Ashley swallowed hard, her voice shaking. "You shouldn't believe me. Not yet. Belief comes with time. I can't erase what I did. I can only choose every day to be different, to show my son something better. I belong here because I need to listen. I need to hear you. I need to face what I did, even when it breaks me." The room stayed silent for a long moment. Then another student, a young Black boy, muttered, "At least she admits it." Clips from that session went viral. Again, the nation divided. Some called Ashley brave for facing her critics head-on. Others dismissed her as an actress performing for sympathy. The backlash online was relentless. Memes mocked her, news anchors debated her sincerity, podcasts dissected every tear. Ashley read some of the comments until she couldn't anymore. She smashed her phone against the wall one night, sobbing on the floor, screaming into the emptiness, "What more do you want from me?" But every morning she picked herself up, walked back into the community center, and kept working. She scrubbed floors. She served meals. She listened to stories that tore her open. And slowly, quietly, some people began to see her not as the woman in the viral video, but as someone truly trying to change. For Simone, the turning point came when she attended one of Ashley's sessions incognito, sitting quietly at the back of the room. She watched as Ashley stood trembling before a crowd, admitting again and again her guilt. She watched the skepticism, the anger, the reluctant nods, and she realized something. This wasn't about her anymore. It wasn't about the ruined white dress, the humiliation, the contractions that had threatened her baby. It was about the ripple effect, how one act of cruelty had forced a confrontation that reached far beyond two women. As Simone left the session, she placed a hand on her belly. The baby kicked strongly, as if reminding her, life continues, change is possible, but it will never be easy. And as Ashley walked home that night, exhausted, beaten down by backlash, yet still moving forward, she whispered into the darkness, "I don't deserve forgiveness, but I'll fight for redemption every day." For the first time, she almost believed it. The story had started with a single cruel act in a glittering restaurant, but by now its impact had rippled far beyond Charlie's dinner. What had once been whispered behind closed doors was now broadcast across boardrooms, news channels, and city council meetings. Everyone was talking about racism in customer service, about dignity denied in spaces where it should have been guaranteed. And as protests swelled outside restaurants across the city, the industry realized it could no longer hide behind polite silence. For Ashley, the change began with a phone call she didn't expect. The National Association of Hospitality Leaders wanted her to participate in a pilot program, a training series designed to root out bias in the service industry. They didn't want her because she was an expert. They wanted her because she was the cautionary tale, the living reminder of what unchecked prejudice could do. At first, Ashley resisted. She wanted to hide, to disappear, not stand under more spotlights. But when she looked at Tyler, recovering steadily after surgery, she knew she couldn't say no. If her shame could help prevent another child from watching their mother collapse under the weight of hate, maybe it was worth it. Her first session as a trainer was terrifying. She stood in front of 30 new hires from a major restaurant chain, her palms sweaty, her voice shaking. Behind her was a projected headline, "White Waitress dumps water on pregnant Black woman." The words burned like fire every time she saw them, but she forced herself to face them. "That was me," she began, her voice cracking. "I was the woman in that headline, and because of my actions, a mother and her unborn child were put in danger. Because of my actions, I almost destroyed a family, and because of my actions, I had to face myself in ways I never wanted to." The room was silent. No one moved, no one smirked. They listened. Some shifted uncomfortably, Others stared at her with wide eyes. And for the first time, Ashley realized that her greatest punishment could also be her greatest responsibility to ensure no one else followed the path she had taken. Meanwhile, Charlie's dinner had become ground zero for reform. The restaurant's owner, desperate to salvage his empire, announced sweeping changes. Every employee, from servers to management, would undergo mandatory bias training. A new complaints hotline was launched, monitored not by the restaurant itself, but by an independent agency. Anonymous mystery diners would now evaluate staff interactions with customers of color, reporting directly to the board. What had been a luxury dining space now became a test case for justice. The changes spread quickly. Other restaurants, fearing similar scandals, adopted similar policies. By the end of the month, more than 24 establishments across the city had implemented new training, accountability measures, and community partnerships. The movement had grown larger than Ashley, larger than Simone, larger even than Gerald's quiet influence. What began as humiliation at a single table had become a citywide reckoning. Yet even as change took root, the tension inside Simone grew. Her due date was approaching, and with it, waves of anxiety. She often sat in the nursery late at night, folding tiny clothes, running her fingers across the soft blankets. Her unborn daughter kicked strongly, reminding her of life's persistence. But Simone's heart remained torn. She wanted to believe the changes were real, that Ashley's suffering and her own humiliation had birthed something better. Yet she couldn't erase the memory of that night. The cold water dripping from her skin, the smirk that told her she didn't belong. One evening, she attended a meeting where Ashley presented her testimony to a group of restaurant executives. Simone slipped into the back quietly, unnoticed, her belly prominent, her expression calm but watchful. Ashley stood at the podium, her voice steady for the first time. "I can't undo what I did, but I can tell you this. Every time you let silence cover cruelty, you plant the seeds of the same hatred that consumed me. Don't look away. Don't excuse it. Don't wait until it's too late." Simone felt her throat tighten. For the first time, she saw a flicker of sincerity that didn't feel like performance. She placed a hand on her belly, whispering to her unborn daughter, "Maybe the world can change. Maybe." But Gerald remained unconvinced. He still watched Ashley with suspicion, his mind cataloging every hesitation, every tear, every phrase. To him, her suffering was justice, and her newfound role was merely part of the punishment. "She's still working off a debt," he told Simone later that night. "Don't mistake progress for payment. She hasn't earned forgiveness. Not yet." The conflict between them grew sharper as the due date neared. Simone argued that true justice wasn't just about punishment, it was about transformation. Gerald argued that transformation without accountability was weakness. Their voices rose in quiet but tense exchanges behind closed doors, their love tested by the weight of wounds neither of them had chosen. Meanwhile, Ashley continued her community service. Each day chipped away at her pride, each story she heard scraped deeper into her heart. She organized donation drives, cleaned kitchens, and delivered meals. One afternoon, she sat with a group of teenage girls, answering their questions honestly. "Do you still hate black people?" one asked bluntly. Ashley's face flushed. "No," she said, her voice steady. "I hated myself, and I used racism to cover it. But now, I see people as people. I'm ashamed it took me this long." The girl studied her for a moment, then shrugged. "At least you're trying." It wasn't forgiveness, but it was something. As weeks turned into months, Ashley's presence in the community became more familiar. Some still glared, refusing to soften. Others began to nod in acknowledgement. Slowly, painfully, she was rebuilding not her reputation, because that might never recover, but her humanity. And then came the night Simone went into labor. The contractions came hard and fast, sending her to the hospital under a veil of fear and hope. Gerald paced the waiting room like a caged lion, his face carved with worry. Hours passed, until finally, the cry of a newborn echoed through the halls. Their daughter had arrived tiny, fragile, but alive and strong. Simone held her close, tears streaming down her cheeks. Gerald, for the first time in weeks, let his hard exterior crack. He bent over, kissed his wife's forehead, and whispered, "She's perfect." But even in that moment of joy, the shadow of what had happened lingered. The first weeks of their daughter's life had been shaped by hate and humiliation. And though justice had begun to ripple outward, Simone knew the work was far from finished. For Ashley, the news of the baby's birth struck like a lightning bolt. She saw the announcement online, a photo of Simone cradling her daughter, radiant and serene. Ashley collapsed onto her bed, weeping into her hands. She whispered into the silence, "I almost took that from her, and she gave my son back to me." The weight of that truth pressed on her chest like stone. It was a burden she would carry forever, but perhaps also the compass that would guide her. Because justice wasn't just about the tables of Charlie's dinner anymore. It was about the future of children, Simone's, Ashley's, and every child who deserved to grow up in a world where dignity wasn't rationed by skin color. And as the city moved forward, bruised but not broken, both women understood one thing. The fight against racism was no longer a private battle. It had become a movement, demanding change not just from one person, but from everyone. The city had not forgotten. A full year had passed since that fateful night at Charlie's dinner, yet the story still echoed through neighborhoods, in classrooms, in boardrooms where policy was written. What began as one cruel act, a waitress pouring water on a pregnant black woman, had become a catalyst for reform, conversation, and painful growth. But the final chapter of this story wasn't written in headlines or policies. It was written in the lives of those who had lived it. Simone sat in her home, rocking her newborn daughter Isabella in her arms. The baby's soft coos filled the room, a lullaby against the chaos of the world outside. Gerald entered quietly, pausing in the doorway to watch the two of them. His face, once hardened by fury, had softened in the months since the birth. The storm of vengeance that had consumed him had slowly given way to something else, the fierce tenderness of fatherhood, the realization that his legacy would not be measured by how thoroughly he destroyed his enemies, but by how much he built for his child. Yet even as he held his daughter, Gerald's mind still wrestled with Ashley. He had seen her tears, her apologies, her service at the community center, her trembling testimony before strangers. But he remained skeptical. Could someone like her truly change? Or was she only reshaping her mask, learning to hide her prejudice under softer expressions? Justice, to Gerald, had always been about consequences. Mercy still felt like a risk. But Simone saw things differently. Her own heart had been split in two by what happened. One part scarred forever by the humiliation, the other part unwilling to let hate define her future. Watching Ashley serve mothers at the center, hearing her speak raw truths at public forums, Simone recognized something she knew well: transformation born from pain. She didn't excuse Ashley, but she couldn't ignore the signs that she was walking a new path. And perhaps that path mattered more than punishment ever could. The true test came on a warm spring evening, when the foundation hosted a public event marking the anniversary of the Charlie's dinner incident. The hall was filled with reporters, community leaders, activists, and ordinary citizens. At the center of the stage sat 3 chairs, one for Simone, one for Gerald, and one for Ashley. It would be their first time appearing together publicly since that night. The tension was palpable. When Ashley walked onto the stage, murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some booed softly, others sat in cold silence. She wore a plain blouse and slacks, her hair tied back simply. There was no makeup, no effort to hide the exhaustion carved into her face. She carried only a folder, filled with the reflection essay she had been required to write. Simone looked at her calmly, her daughter resting in Gerald's arms just off stage. Gerald's eyes were sharp, unflinching, ready to strike if Ashley faltered. The moderator spoke. "Tonight we revisit what happened 1 year ago, not to relive the pain but to confront it. Ashley Morrison, you have been through community service, training, and public accountability. Tonight, you will speak directly to those you hurt." Ashley stood, her hands trembling. She opened the folder, but after a pause, she closed it again. She spoke without notes. "A year ago, I believed that pouring water on a woman like Simone proved something that it proved I belonged, that she didn't. I thought hate would make me feel powerful, but it didn't. It made me weak. It made me cruel, and it almost destroyed me. But more than that, it almost destroyed her." She gestured to Simone. "A mother, a doctor, a human being carrying life inside her. I humiliated her, and in doing so, I put her child at risk. I can never erase that." Her voice cracked, but she pressed on. When my own son lay dying, it was Simone and Gerald who saved him. They had every reason to turn me away, but they didn't. And that mercy has haunted me every single day, because it forced me to see who I really was. Not strong, not clever, just hateful and small. The room was silent. Ashley wiped her eyes. I have spent the last year trying to become someone my son can respect. Not because I deserve forgiveness, but because I refuse to poison him with the same hate I carried. Every dish I washed, every story I listened to at the community center, every moment of facing those I hurted has broken me open. And in that breaking, I've learned this. Hate doesn't just destroy the victim, it destroys the one who carries it. I know because it nearly destroyed me. She turned fully to Simone now, her voice a whisper trembling with sincerity. You don't owe me anything. Not forgiveness, not even acknowledgement, but I owe you everything. For saving my son, for forcing me to see myself, for giving me a chance to choose another way. I will spend the rest of my life proving that your mercy wasn't wasted. For a long moment, Simone didn't speak. The audience held its breath. Then she stood slowly, her posture graceful, her eyes shining with tears. She walked toward Ashley, stopping just a few feet away. A year ago, you tried to strip me of my dignity. You made me feel small, less than human. And I will never forget that pain. But I see you now, and what I see is not the woman who poured water on me. I see a woman who is learning, who is trying, who is carrying the weight of her actions every day. She turned to the audience, her voice strong. This isn't about me. It isn't about Ashley. It's about all of us. About how silence feeds cruelty. About how hate poisons communities. About how mercy, when chosen carefully, can create change. She paused, her hand instinctively resting on her daughter's head. Justice isn't just about punishment. It's about transformation. And tonight, I choose to believe that transformation is possible. The hall erupted not in applause, but in something deeper. A wave of emotion rippled through the crowd. Some wept openly. Others nodded in solemn agreement. The weight of Simone's words lingered in the air long after she sat down. Gerald sat stiffly, his jaw clenched. He wasn't ready to embrace mercy. But as he looked at his daughter sleeping peacefully in his arms, he realized something. The future he wanted for her was not built on endless vengeance. It was built on dignity, on respect, on a world where hate had no room to grow. Slowly, reluctantly, he stood and placed a hand on Simone's shoulder. He didn't say a word, but his silence carried meaning. Ashley wept quietly, not from relief, but from the knowledge that this moment was not an ending, but a beginning. Forgiveness had not been given. Redemption had not been secured. But the chance to walk a new road had been opened. As the event closed, Simone whispered to her daughter, "Justice always finds a way. And sometimes, justice means choosing love when hate seems easier." The lights dimmed, the crowd dispersed, but the message endured. One woman's cruelty had sparked a reckoning. One family's pain had become a movement. And 1 year later, though scars remained, hope had taken root. And so, what began as a cruel act in a crowded restaurant became a story that shook a city, tested a family, and transformed a life. Simone found her strength not just in enduring humiliation, but in choosing dignity when others tried to strip it away. Gerald discovered that true protection for his family didn't come from vengeance alone, but from creating a future where his daughter could grow without fear. And Ashley learned the hardest truth of all, that hate doesn't only destroy the people we target, it corrodes our own soul until there is nothing left but regret. This story reminds us that racism is never a private wound. It spreads, it ripples, it leaves scars on everyone it touches, but so does justice. Justice ripples outward too, through policy, through voices raised in truth, through the courage to say, no more. And sometimes, justice even leaves space for mercy. Because mercy is what transforms punishment into lasting change. If this story moved you, if it made you think, if it reminded you of the power we all carry to confront hate when we see it, don't stay silent. Speak, share, and let's keep building a world where dignity is not questioned and respect is not negotiable. Thank you for walking with us through this journey. If you believe stories like this matter, I invite you to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to the channel so together we can keep amplifying voices of justice, resilience, and truth. Because in the end, Justice always finds a way, and so must we.